Monsters exist, but they're too few in number to matter. The real monsters are the ordinary men and women ready to obey without question. Now, that's not my quote, I wish it was. That's a quote of Primo Levi, an Italian Jew who was interned at Auschwitz, and he wrote a book called If This Is a Man, which I really strongly recommend if anyone's not read it, that you do. I use that quote. It's such a powerful and insightful quote. I use that quote in my book that I will be providing a thorough update on very, very soon. It's currently in the second stage of editing. It's a very, very long process publishing a book. But I wanted to talk about that quote and how insightful it is. Now, what's striking about the book, Primo Levi's book, is unlike my book, where it's very driven by emotion, his rather counterintuitively, considering the circumstances that he lived through and what he was subjected to, along obviously with millions of others, is quite emotionless. It's not driven by a passion or a desire for revenge or an anger. It's driven by a purely a desire to understand through purely observing what those ordinary men and women in the Third Reich, under the control of the Nazi Party, did to other human beings, namely murder them, commit genocide on behalf of the state. And what he says there, the first part of that sentence, monsters exist, but they're too few in numbers. So that alludes to truly evil people. Call them tyrants, call them psychopaths. Of course, unfortunately, there are people, individuals who have lived ever since the dawn of civilization who are like that, and they walk amongst us. Well, they don't walk amongst us. Well, we hope they don't walk amongst us, but they exist, and we can think of some very prominent figures. Anybody who's paying attention would be able to name those individuals in the political, scientific, medical community, for example. The second part of the sentence, though, the real monsters are the ordinary men and women ready to obey without question. There's so much truth to that. It cuts to the very core of what it is that I try to do with this channel. Because what I try to do with this channel is not talk about things like the Great Reset and UN Agenda 30 and the malign influence of non-governmental organisations and big pharmaceutical cartels. As interesting as that all is, and as true as that all is, my interest is, why is it that those actual monsters are able to bring out true evil in those who do walk amongst us, in those ordinary men and women? How are they able to do it, and why does it happen? That's what intrigues and fascinates and terrifies me. I read a quote, I think it's someone just put it on a YouTube video I'd watched a couple of weeks ago, and it simply said, you either understand history or you trust the government. You cannot be both. You cannot. And that cuts to the core of the quote. The many quotes around history and how human beings and societies never learn from history. And primarily that's because of a widespread lack of introspection and yearning for knowledge and yearning for understanding that unfortunately most people possess little of. Now, I'm assuming that some of you, many of you, have visited various historical sites where you see tangible first-hand evidence, proof of atrocities that have been committed in the name of political ideologies or any ideologies. Now, and if you have, let me know where you've been and what you learned from it. I've been to Auschwitz in Poland twice, and I've been to Dachau outside Munich, which is one of the first concentration camps that the Nazis set up in the early 1930s. And I've also travelled extensively around Eastern Europe and learned, as I say, firsthand to supplement what I'd learned through reading and watching documentaries, etc. But learned firsthand the evils of communism as well, and the despicable acts that were committed in many countries in Eastern Europe very, very recently. And when you consider what Western societies have allowed to happen in the last 2.5 years, we're talking now, aren't we? And then compare that to the number of people who, let's just take Auschwitz for example. How many people have gone to Krakow? You know, the first time I went to Auschwitz, I was actually on a stag weekend, stag do to Krakow, and in the middle of that we actually did go to Auschwitz, which quite clearly brought a dark energy to the trip for that day. And the second time I went, I was on holiday with Sarah, and we visited Auschwitz. But just think how many people have been to that one place, how many millions of people have passed through the gates of Auschwitz. Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. The most devious and sinister and ironic words that have ever been said. How many millions of people have passed through those gates, have walked around the gas chambers, and have seen behind the panes of glass, the hundreds of thousands of tiny little pairs of shoes of children, the masses of human hair, and the suitcases that were harvested and taken from the unfortunate people, the Jews, the political dissidents, the homosexuals, the priests, anybody who didn't belong to the Nazi ideology. How many millions of people have seen those things and have just come out, they've done the trip to Auschwitz, and they've not understood. Because, and add to that, all of the other historical sites throughout the world where people have a real opportunity to understand why these things have happened. We've been lucky in the last 30 years since the advent of cheap travel, where many people have been able to visit these sites, a short 2-3 hour plane journey away, for 60 quid return and cheap hotel accommodation, to go and learn. Go and see a different culture, but go and learn what went on our doorstep in the 20th century. And the sad conclusion is most people don't understand why these things happen. They think that the kind of behaviour that was displayed belonged to a different era. I remember when we went to Dachau, 2009 I think it was, when I was on a trip to Munich. You know, we went to Dachau, and I remember on the tour someone asked the most idiotic question that I think I've ever heard. Some questions are idiotic. This fella said, why didn't the police arrest Hitler? Now, where'd you start with how moronic that comment is? I think it's just a neat little example of the type of mindset maybe that is prevalent amongst a generation and a people today who have very little to no understanding of history and no yearning to know. What goes through the minds of individuals when they participate in a despicable tyranny? They allow it to happen, they encourage it to happen, some of them, or they say nothing to stop it happening. When they're also aware on some level of things like the Holocaust or the Bolshevik Revolution, things I talked about in my last video, you know, mass genocides that have taken place very, very, very close to here, very recently. What goes through their minds? How do they not see the correlation in how our society is degenerated to a very, very similar level? And I wanted to do this video because how entitled we have become, whereby, as I say, many of us have had the opportunity to really learn, to ensure that the darkest periods of history don't repeat, that we ensure things like that never happen again. And we can do that. We've been able to do that for just a few quid. And people seem to have forgotten, not understood, not tried to understand. That first quote, I'm going to say it again. Monsters exist, but they're too few in number. The real monsters are the ordinary men and women ready to obey without question. Can anybody really put the case forward that atrocities committed in the name of disobeying have been worse than the atrocities committed because of obedience? My understanding of history is such that if we look through the darkest periods, and we're living through one right now, tyranny, totalitarianism, whatever, takes place because of a mass obedience. And what I've learned above all in the last 2 and a bit years, probably above everything else, is that human beings, what's the one kind of character trait, if there is one, that unites most people? A need to conform, allied with a cowardice. Now, when you go to, when I went to Auschwitz, I talk a lot about my experience there in my book. But what really struck me wasn't even what happened and what they did. As shocking as that was, I wanted to understand the scale of it. I wanted to understand how it could happen on such a huge scale. And that leads you to a logical next step, which is, okay, the scale was massive. It must have involved millions of people, which of course it did. I think we live in an age where a lot of people they struggle with the concepts of good and evil. You see this with a lot of people who believe in God. I think if you believe in God, you must also acknowledge the presence of evil as well. So there's a problem, there's a mental block that people have with acknowledging the presence of evil in our world, which is highly naive. So there's that. And because of that, they're not able to notice when that evil that actually is the potential for that lies deep in the soul of every human being. When that comes bubbling to the surface, when they're asked to accept or implement evil, they're not able to observe, notice and understand, even though many of those same people have actually been to those sites of historical atrocities. The ignorance is utterly astounding. If this generation, as I say, with all the opportunities that we've had with our access to unlimited information and resources, and even more so with the opportunity that many of us have had to go and see firsthand what can happen when a society obeys a political leader implementing an ideology. If a generation like ours hasn't, with all that in mind, has allowed to happen merely 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain, what does that say about that people? Go back to that quote again, because here's something important, in my opinion. People don't need to be overly concerned with the real monsters, with the real devils, the demons, the tyrants, the orchestrators of this attempted totalitarian takeover of the Western world. Nobody needs to be too concerned with that, because the orchestrators, as Primo Levi told us, are few in number. The real monsters, though, they are not few in number, and they really do walk amongst us. And I would say, particularly for anybody who has children, you need to be highly aware of who those monsters are, where they're working, and what they are doing. And you will find that they are working in hospitals in roles such as doctors and nurses. I'm not saying this is every, far from it, I'm not saying that, but they are the doctors and nurses and the teachers and the police. Why is it, particularly in this country, that we put doctors and nurses and teachers, we don't put police, doctors, nurses and teachers on such a high pedestal? Because we are now in the situation whereby not only do we have a general population who is dumb and stupid and, as I say, not aware of human morality, of how a society can rise and fall, of groupthink and an awareness of history. Not only that, but we now, because of decades of planning and scheming, we have a situation where we have some of the absolute last people on earth that you would want in positions of authority, such as doctors, nurses, teachers and police, and I could go on. So, ever since the start of the first lockdown, when I quickly woke up to what was going on, what's terrified me hasn't been, you know, the plans, where they want to take us, and it's all obvious. As my brother Chris said, the World Economic Forum has announced its arrival in the room and slammed the door shut behind it. So in the age of information, anyone who's not acknowledging that is ignorant. And they are a problem. They are monsters. They're not the ones you need to worry about. And this is what I've been passionately advocating for a long, long time now with my videos. And I've made the case for in my book, which is that as a society, we've become so beholden to ideology, so skeptical of ideas and new thinking. We have denigrated the role of the individual in society to such an extent that those individuals who still do feel the need and want to express and realise the importance are looked upon with suspicion, hence why we're labelled all kinds of things. Now the great thing is there are very many of us. We are a large minority, and as I've said before, There is an intellectual and moral rebellion bubbling beneath the surface, and sooner or later that will go, it will spring forth. But for the time being, in the perilous state that we are in and the danger that we are in, that danger comes from those people who are all around us, who will stop at nothing so long as they get their paycheck. They will lie, they will cover up, and they will participate in pure evil things. They are the monsters that Primo Levi, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, talks about. And not only is there some truth to what I'm saying there, in my opinion, but we continue, too many, to naively place these last people that you would want in these positions of authority. We look upon them as a legitimate authority. And again, let me say, for anybody who's working in any of those institutions who's not complied with the... I don't have words for it anymore. I use words like repugnant and despicable and disgusting. Those words just simply won't do. But for anybody who has not complied, who has spoken out, as I've said many times, you are the best of the best. But I think it's pretty clear to see that particularly within the National Health Service and the police and the teaching profession, and there are others, there really are utter monsters doing monstrous things. So there's my story for today. Until we as a society, enough of us, make that connection and have that understanding that the ability of the state to draw out evil in its citizens is there and is easily attainable, and that reflection and introspection is done on a widespread scale, then we will be at the behest of the psychopathic monsters who are orchestrating all this. And I'm not sure, I'm not confident that we have enough awareness of that. I think we have too much emphasis on things like the Great Reset and, you know, the transhumanism agenda and the net carbon zero and all the rest of it. Yes, that is all happening, but it's happening because society's allowing it to happen. And society's allowing it to happen because too many people are still standing by and doing nothing, which is why I keep passionately saying we need to speak up. We need to tell the world what we think. We need to, anybody who's still in some way aware on some level and is carrying on, it's amazing to take the lessons of the last 2 years, to see what human beings are capable of, to see how much of an empty shell people can become when bombarded simply with information and orders. And unfortunately, you just either get it or you don't. You just get it. You go to Auschwitz and you just get it, or you don't. You understand that, you know, 90-odd%, 95, 97, maybe 99.9% of people, if they were there, they would have been doing the same thing. You either understand that or you don't. You either understand that you wouldn't have been sheltering Jews, you wouldn't have been in the French resistance, for example. You wouldn't have been speaking out against Stalin's communist regime. You either get that or you don't. you know, it always makes me chuckle when I hear people say, oh, well, if I was there, I would have done something. I would have hidden Anne Frank. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You couldn't even disobey. You know, you couldn't even disobey one immoral rule in your own country yesterday. So no, you wouldn't, because you're immoral. So there you go. I've been thinking about this concept for a long time. I'm intrigued, and I mean for a long time, probably since, I don't know, my early 20s maybe. I've been intrigued by all this. I remember the profound and shocking effect that that it had on me. You know, when I visited Auschwitz the second time I went, not as shocking, but the first time, yeah. Because as I say, the scale of it, and in my head I thought, this was done by people like me, by people like you, because that's how people's souls and minds can be corrupted en masse. So just take a minute really to reflect on those chilling words, Primo Levi. And we change it. I keep talking about, we change society from the bottom up, by the top down. We don't need a leader. Politics isn't the solution. There needs to be widespread reflection and introspection and understanding, acknowledgement and contriteness, ultimately. That's even before we get to the point where the full truth is outed and justice is served. We do that from the bottom up by individuals being brave enough to admit what they've done. Will they do it though? Will they do it? And if they don't do it, what happens next? You know, I can certainly make a case for a future that is, for those of us who are aware of these concepts, aware of the bigger picture about on the plans, and can see exactly what's happening, and who've built resilience like I have. Even though my last couple of videos have been maybe a little bit down and negative, but that's just how I'm feeling at the moment. Doesn't mean I'm not. I haven't built those layers of resilience. I can make a future. I can make a case for a future where there can be a parallel society operating outside of that, and it is, you know, the seeds of it were sown quite a long time ago actually. But in terms of society, of our world, the systems, the organisational structures that oversee it, all that kind of thing, and how many people are at the mercy of these monsters. Very, very dark, very, very dark. So there we go. Let me know what you think of what I've said today in today's video. Let's hope I don't get banned again. Although, you know, who knows? And don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, bye bye.